Honestly, like, what's not to love about what I do? It's just amazing. I get to see and do different things. The trust of my subjects is something that I take very seriously. Hey, what's going on? My name's Aundre Larrow. I'm a Brooklyn-based visual artist. I specialize in portraiture, art direction, and videography. Today, we're discussing those very things. What are my strategies to help you deliver a successful photo shoot? My photo experience is really varied. In college, I worked at my student paper, and after college, I worked at startups, collaborated with big brands, and made things with local businesses that I love. As a commercial photographer, it's important to me that the first time I work with a client, we get on the same page of their vision and their visual language. Today's class is all about the process, understanding which soft skills you need to deliver that photo shoot and to make sure everyone you work with on the project is excited about it. Now let's be even more granular and understand what does it take to get this done. To properly understand your how, you need to focus on three basic tenets: your production, your time, and your budget. We'll go in reverse order and start with budget because we all know what that is. Budget is how much things cost. You start off each fiscal year with a budget, and so you have to allocate it per project. But if for some reason you have a variable budget, it might help you depending on how the project needs change. Time is how much time do you have? Can you spend a month on this project, a week, 2 days? And production. What else does it take to deliver this from a vision to reality? If you have a product that's used in the wild, something like a backpack or shoes or something that you'd see every day, generally it's important to showcase that value proposition of the product out in regular life. But maybe if it's makeup or a soft good, something that folks use to improve their lives, the visual work that you might be focusing on might be done in a studio space. Does your company have one already? Do you need to rent one? If you need to do film components, is the sound space affected? Will there be things that are interrupting that? If you see something you like, what are all the ways that it can go wrong, right? Could it snow that day? Do we need to be inside? What happens if it's overcast? Do we have a contingency day? Is there someone there that can hold the equipment? All of these are production questions that you should bring up to your stakeholders early so they understand what happens if you might have changes or overages in your budget. Once you add in production and budget, you then create a deck or a proposal. That's where we kind of elevate and evolve what we're trying to do. And to do that, the way that I planned it out, I picked an early morning because in New York City, it's always really busy. I picked an area that was slightly less populated, and then I scouted it a couple days early and walked through the space at the same time that I was going to be photographing it. That is that pre-production. And that's stuff that you already know implicitly because you've done it, whether that's at the company or just whenever you make things in your personal life. The next thing I want to talk about is time. You can create a production timeline that says you'll have the deliverables at this date, but also different dates with touchstones and deliverables that can show the progress of your project. That way you can make quantitative, measurable moments for your qualitative deliverable. Obviously, we're all worried about a work-life balance. And one of the first things I want to bring up that I learned in-house is what happens with revisions. Revisions can be a great way to fix a problem, but without parameters, it can be a fast way for you to never finish a project and then get behind on all your work. So I think it's important when you're presenting, taking your mood boards, taking your visions, and presenting them to stakeholders, that you ask them how they want to deal with revisions. Do the stakeholders want to be present while the work is being captured? If they are, how often can they interject? It's also helpful when you're establishing the mood board to establish what sort of feedback you want and what's the most effective way to give it. What I mean by that is for someone who doesn't deal in the creative, they might be trying to communicate with you that this doesn't feel right for the project. And it's your job to kind of root out what they mean so that when you're there capturing, whether they're there with you or not, you don't have to stop continuously and end up costing more money and your time. Your goal here in establishing a production schedule, in making sure you stay on budget, and understanding what your time is going to be is to eliminate the guesswork, reduce your stress, and more importantly, give you the freedom day of to capture what you wanted to in the first place. You already understand what all the steps are. What I want you to do is to be able to communicate it with your stakeholders so that once the stakes are established, they understand what it takes to get there. Being able to frame everything you need to do quantitatively will help you not only have a better reflection of your time, but also yield a better budget or just an understanding with the folks that you're working with, which is really important. Before I worked at Walker & Company, I would shoot a lot of street style photography and really embrace happy accidents. But once I had to start to replicate things so that they would work for company goals, I recognized that sometimes I can't just work based on like happenstance. And you already know that. So being able to plan and being able to put things together is a great strength of yours, because once you get to that day, you can breathe easy and just flow.
All right, so the first step I take when going about to plan a photo shoot, there's usually two things I need. One is a model, the second being location. I always figure out who I'm shooting with first before I get the location. It's just a weird workflow that I've always had, and that's just kind of how I like doing it. So for today's shoot, I wound up booking Michele Maturo. She's definitely down to like push and figure out something creative to shoot with versus just following into a routine and doing the same old, same old. I like when you shoot with a model that she brings an attitude and a spirit of sorts that's like, let's have fun. What can we create today that's going to be a little bit different than last time? What usually catches my eye about a model or someone I want to shoot with is a look that's theirs. They're not trying to be anyone else. They're not trying to copy anyone else. It's more or less like they're just being them. So for me, when I look at pictures, that's what I see, and that makes me say, hey, I want to shoot with that person. I don't really look at other photographers' work of them just because that's how that photographer saw them and that's how they shot them. I really want to see who they are. So I really kind of look for candid like friend photos, selfies. Like I feel like they kind of shine through a little bit more truer in those pictures than someone else, styling them up and doing this conceptual thing that doesn't really represent them. I always have the model bring her own wardrobe. It's an extension of themselves. It's very important for your model to be into or excited about what she's shooting. I'll tell girls, bring sweatpants if you want, bring a baggy t-shirt. Like it doesn't have to be this tight form-fitting thing. It could be a baggy hooded sweatshirt and you could still look just as hot in it. Whatever it may be, I just think it's the idea that it's relatable, that you could have had a girlfriend who dressed like that, had something about her, So the location I have today is a estate I have shot at prior. For me, I've always been a fan of shooting with natural light. So the one real good thing about this location is the amount of windows on both sides of the house. It does have a western facing view. You try to shoot during the golden hour, it's a very warm tone. It's very saturated. So today's shoot is actually gonna be a little bit earlier in the morning where it's a little bit more evenly cooled. I also am a big fan of minimalism, so I don't want to shoot at a place that's like totally cluttered with a ton of furniture. I prefer for my shoots, concrete, hardwood floors, just very, very clean and modern.
One of the key aspects of DSLR photography is exposure. And exposure is basically how light or how dark your image is. And in order to capture the images that you have in mind that you want to create, you have to understand exposure. So the question now is, what goes into exposure? How do I get the proper exposure? Well, there's three things that go into exposure. There's aperture, there's shutter speed, and there's ISO. And we'll cover all three of these things in depth. But just so you understand fundamentally, in order to get the perfect exposure, these three things are going to move in tandem to one another. So if you change shutter speed, now aperture and ISO are affected. If you change aperture, now ISO and shutter speed are affected. So these are the three things that go into exposure that get you the perfect image. It's not too bright, not too dark. They get you right in the middle and allows you for an image that you can work with in retouching or something that is going to be nice right out of the box. So before we get started talking about the individual factors that go into exposure like aperture and shutter speed and ISO, I wanted to touch quickly on how the mechanics of a camera work. So very briefly, you have a camera, right? And on the front of the camera, you have a lens. And everybody's familiar, I think most people know, on a camera, there's a button you push and that's how you take a picture. So what happens when you click that button? First thing that happens is that there's an opening in your lens the whole time. And when you click the button, light is allowed to pass through that lens and hit a sensor in the back of the camera. So you can see this little mirror in the camera. That's why a DSLR is called that. It's a digital single lens reflex, which means it has a mirror in here that allows you to see through the lens. So what happens when you press the button is the mirror flips up and it reveals this sensor. And in film, what would happen is the mirror would flip up and you'd see physical film. So you click the button, light passes through this lens, makes contact with the sensor, and how long that light hits that sensor is what determines your exposure. So let's talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is the part that controls the duration or the amount of time that light is allowed to hit the sensor, which is where the image is printed or captured. shutter speed is always represented as a number. So 1/500, 1/2500. And that is literally the fraction of a second that is allowed for the light to come through the lens and hit the sensor. So remember, the sensor is behind this mirror and light passes through this lens. So if I leave the shutter open for a second, that means I'm letting a second worth of light come through and hit the sensor. If I leave the sensor open for 1/2500 of a second, that means an instant that light is passing onto the sensor. So just to demonstrate, I'll show you the fastest shutter speed this camera will do, and then I'll show you a slow one so you can see what's really going on inside the camera. So the first shutter that I'm going to show you is 1/8000 and show you how quick that really is. Hear that? That's so quick. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we're going to do 1 second. It's going to seem like a lifetime comparatively. So you're basically having a full second of exposure on your image. So that's a big drastic difference, and you want to understand what those different ranges will deliver to your final image. So one of the great things about shutter speed is it sort of serves two purposes. One purpose, as we just talked about, is it'll control how much light is allowed to hit your sensor. So it can allow your image to look lighter or darker depending on how fast or how slow you manipulate the shutter speed. But the second thing it does, it allows you to freeze motion. So if you shoot with a faster shutter speed, you can freeze motion. However, if you want to see some motion in your image, a slower shutter speed will allow you to obtain that. For instance, you're trying to shoot a friend walking across the street and you want to freeze that motion, you might want to be in a shutter range of 1/250 to 1/500. And you might be able to physically hand hold that camera and really get a good frozen sharp image of somebody walking. Now, if you want to catch something like a car or somebody running or jogging, you're going to need to shoot a little bit faster. And that range is probably going to be around 1/1000, 1/2500, or maybe even a little faster. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, if you want to show a little blur but also keep your subject sharp, you might be somewhere in the range of 1/30. Say you're taking a picture of a beautiful waterfall and you want to make the water look smooth and silky, you might be at half a second, you might be at a full second. And if you're taking a picture at night and you want to show a beautiful skyline with the stars twinkling and be able to capture sort of lights moving as they drive through highways or intersections and see that light trail, you're going to want to shoot even slower, maybe at 30 seconds exposure. So you can use shutter speed all along the spectrum to capture some really cool and creative photos, but it's about knowing those typical ranges and being able to hone in on that allow you to really take control of the camera and the picture that comes out of as a result of it. The other benefit of shutter speed is it allows you to negate the impact of camera shake. So for instance, I'm holding a camera right now and it's not on, but if I hold this camera for 2 or 3 seconds, you'll notice, or at least I can notice up close, that the camera shakes a little bit. It's not perfectly steady. And the faster you shoot an image, the less that becomes a factor. The slower you shoot an image, the more likely you're to be susceptible to the camera shake and seeing that on the final image. So remember that not only can shutter speed help you in controlling your exposure, it can also help you with getting rid of camera shake. It can help you freeze motion. It can also help you show motion in an image. So it's got a lot of impact that it can have on the final image that you're trying to shoot. So the next thing I want to talk about is aperture. And aperture is basically the size of the opening through which light passes through the lens. Now, how does that have an effect on exposure? Well, the bigger the opening in the lens, the more light will pass through. And the smaller the opening in the lens, the less light will pass through. So directly impacts whether the image will be dark or light. Now, aperture is denoted as a number as well, and it's called the f-stop. The f-stop controls the size of the opening. It's going to sound a little counterintuitive, but the smaller the number, the bigger the opening. And the bigger the number, the smaller the opening. So this lens is a 2470 2.8, meaning 2.8 is the maximum aperture, meaning the biggest opening that the lens can have. So thinking about the final image, if I shoot this at 2.8, all other things not being considered, I'm gonna have a lot of light or a brighter image. And if I shoot this at f22, the same lighting conditions, I'm gonna have a darker image as a result. So not only can you use aperture to help control the exposure of your image, you can also use aperture to help with sort of the creative aspects of your image. One of the things that gets mentioned a lot with aperture is depth of field. And let's do it in layman's terms. Depth of field is basically how blurry the picture ends up being beyond the thing that you're pointing the camera at. So if I'm shooting a picture of a person right in front of me and I focus on their face and I want their face to be really sharp and crisp, what does the rest of the image look like beyond that person? Is it really blurry? Is it in focus? And that's basically our depth of field. The more blurry the image becomes beyond the subject is the more shallow the depth of field is. If the image behind that subject is really sharp and in focus, we'll say that depth of field isn't very shallow. When you're using a camera, let's just use this 2.8 maximum aperture lens as an example. If I'm shooting at 2.8, the maximum aperture or the widest opening, if I take a picture of the person in front of me and I focus on their face, everything behind them will start to look blurry because at 2.8, with the opening being so wide, everything is going to fall out of focus beyond the subject. Now, if I turn my f-stop to f22 and go really, really sharp, things behind that person are going to start to look in focus. So how can you use these different aperture values to benefit your photo? If you want to take a really cool portrait of somebody and you want that really cool, crisp, sharp look where the face is really in focus but everything is blurred out, which allows you to focus more on that person's emotion, you're going to want to shoot with a lower number or a higher aperture. So somewhere in the neighborhood, if you have a lens that goes all the way down to 1.2, somewhere between 1.2 and say 3.2. That's a good range to get a really good blur behind your subject, but to make sure your subject's still in focus. Now at the other end, if you want to do sort of a landscape or a group photo, you might want to shoot with a higher number or what we call a lower aperture. So let's go with a group of 3 or 4 people, and you want to make sure all their faces are in focus. I like to start somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.6 and then work all the way up to 8 or 11. That will guarantee, or will get closer to guaranteeing, that all your friends' faces will be in focus. Now, if you want to shoot an image in nature, say that waterfall we talked about earlier, and you're stepping back and trying to capture a big scene, you might at sometimes want to go cross above f11 and go somewhere in the neighborhood of f22, f18, and that'll ensure that you can get the most of the scene in focus and very sharp and crisp detail. Now, for most of us, we probably won't need to go above f11, and that's just fine. And for a lot of nature scenes, you won't need to go above f11 either. But those are a good sort of rule of thumb of what you need to do in order to catch these different instances. So remember, the lower number will get that beautiful blur when you're taking pictures of your friends up close for portraits. The middle numbers, 5, 6 to 8, will give you good results if you're trying to get a group of people in sharp focus. And then things around f8 and above are going to give you good shots if you're trying to look for those beautiful landscapes in good focus. So the last factor on the exposure triangle is ISO. For brevity, I'm going to just call it ISO. I like to think of ISO as the weapon of last resort. It's one of the things that you want to keep as low as possible, and let me explain why. So ISO basically affects the sensitivity that your sensor has to light, meaning the higher the number, the more sensitive, meaning brighter. The lower the number, the less sensitive it is to light, so the darker the image. The reason I call this the weapon of last resort is the higher the number goes, meaning let's just say it bottoms out at 100 and it goes all the way up to 3200. The higher you make that number, the more susceptible your final image will be to digital noise. And digital noise is similar to like in the film days of having heavier grain, except unfortunately digital noise doesn't look so great. It's not black and white, it's not monochromatic. It's literally these weird colors and grainy texture to your final image. And you want to try to avoid that. So that's why shooting a lower number is always going to be better. And that's why I also call this the weapon of last resort, because if you are in a situation where there's not enough light and you've already maxed out your aperture, meaning you're shooting at a lower number, a bigger opening in your aperture, you're shooting the slowest speed you can shoot on your shutter speed in order to handhold your camera but not deal with the camera shake, then the last thing you can possibly do is affect your ISO. So if you have to move your ISO to 1600, for instance, because you're shooting inside and the light's not that great, you're going to have a noisier image than if you were shooting outside in bright daylight with an ISO at 100. So you want to be aware of those things when you're shifting around the parameters of your exposure triangle. Most cameras in 2017 will be able to shoot anywhere from 100 ISO all the way up to 6400. And I will caution you against ever maxing out the ISO. You can do it. If you're in a dire pinch and you really need to do it, you're in a really dark concert and you want to get the closing, mashup at the end, and you need to turn this on 6400 just to get that image, by all means, do it. And maybe try to salvage the image in retouching. But if you can avoid it, most cameras that are of this quality, you're going to be stopped out at 1600. Cheaper cameras, probably 800, but I would probably, to be safe, try to stick to a range of 1 to 400. Now, if you do end up having a really awesome camera and you have to shoot at 1600 or 3200, then we'll talk about what you can do later on in the course to clean it up and retouching. But as a happy range, when you're outside, try to keep this thing at 100 ISO. If you switch to inside, try to keep it between 400 and 800. And if you're in a dire situation, 1600 would be the max that I would push your camera to get a really nice.
I got Aziz with me, my model for this lookbook. This fit came together from him and I styling it. I really wanted him to pick the outfit himself so he felt more comfortable in it. With this location, my main goal is just to fill the shot up with the lines and the architecture from corner to corner, and also make sure that he's really isolated. He stands out in the shot. That's one of the reasons we have him kind of all black against this all gray cement, so he'll pop. This red is going to pop like crazy as well. Like I said before, the 3 shots that I'm going to be trying to get is a wide, a mid, and like a macro shot, kind of a tight shot. One thing not to worry about so much is that even when you're shooting lookbooks, at the end of the day, these brands have product shots. These things are going to be shown to the fullest on their website, so you don't really need to focus on shooting the whole graphic and worrying about getting the whole graphic. This is all about vibe. It's all about capturing a particular feeling, because that's what lookbooks are about and that's what you're really trying to sell. So let's get started. Hop over right here. And if you can, just kind of sit like this, as close to the edge as possible, and then like open your shoulders to me. And then I know the light is coming, it's kind of hitting you in the face, but do your best to kind of feel it. I'm trying to shoot from this elevated position. I'm trying to shoot high as up just so I can capture as much of this architecture down here as possible. Can I actually have you move in a little bit towards me? I love the light right now, especially because it's the way it's just actually, you can see it. The way it's hitting his face and even the top of the shirt right now is like, it's perfect. It's kind of hitting the shadows on clothes that aren't even RBW, but everything that is RBW, like the light right now is perfectly hitting. It's hitting his face really nice. So even with my settings right now, my aperture isn't even that high. Like I'm not gonna even go past and stop of f8. So I'm gonna try to stick between f4 and f8 just because I want him to really pop out in the environment. You know, the more my aperture is, the less he becomes isolated and kind of like blends in, everything comes in focus. But I really want to highlight the product and him popping the environment, so I'm keeping my f-stop pretty low. But I also want my shutter high enough that he's able to move around and do his thing, feel comfortable, constantly stop, because if you find a good model, all you have to do is just shoot and they direct themselves. So I'm just trying to get close to the edge so I can still capture all this information on the left here, on the bottom, because I love these lines. The lines going down, the lines going around really add a lot. And the cool part too is as it gets deeper here too, the shadows become darker and darker. So this will eventually just look like a black pit. Stand right here. Stand a little bit closer to me. And then, yeah, exactly. Perfect. I might try to actually shoot you this way. Can I get you over here, Aziz? Is there a way you can open your shoulders a little more towards me? Yeah, perfect. one of the cool things about this macro shot and macros like this too is that even though, you know, you're mainly shooting this graphic, and most people think even when you're shooting the wide shot, you're shooting this graphic. The importance of shooting detail shots like this is even on this flander, you can see most flanders have like a buttons to close it. This is a zipper. So when you shoot the macro shot, like this is getting in it, and all of a sudden people get a feel of the flannel and get more intrigued and are, you know, will actually go to the website to see more about that product. For this next one, I'm just gonna have you slowly just kind of like make minor adjustments just around the chests. I just want to see, you can use both hands too. I just want to see, yeah. So I just really like this because his hands are just adding a little bit more motion to the shot, a little more movement. So it makes the shot a little more interesting. I like that the whole thing is frame to frame, corner to corner, a full image. You have all these lines, architecture against the actual clothing of the model. So this is just gonna pop really hard. So I'm gonna go actually back and chase this light to do that medium style shot. I wanna know if there's a way where we can do it where you're like even closer, not even closer to me, but like closer to the edge. And I'm just being conscious of the wrinkles. That's the whole point of these lookbooks, is that make sure that these wrinkles aren't present and aren't disturbing and making this shoot look amateur and cheap. Because the less wrinkles that you do beforehand, the better the product's gonna look. Because if you do a bunch of editing and you handle all these wrinkles after, you really have a chance of like screwing up the actual product and making it look cheesy. So even with this, I'm gonna get on live view so I can get kind of like right above him. I think I got everything that I needed.